That morning, I was awoken by a pair of giant calloused hands. They were dry, cracked and hardened from all the cold winters working on building sites, plastering walls and ceilings. They were the strong hands of my father. The same hands that held me when I cried and punished me when I stepped out of line. Those hands were capable of creating beautiful works of art from anything: metal, clay, wood, canvas. Those hands held mine as we sat in hospital emergency rooms after another bicycle accident. And those hands wiped away the tears when, years before, I was ripped away from my brothers and sisters. I clung to him for dear life as he passed me into the hands of the Sisters of Charity. The hands that were supposed to love and protect me. So that morning, these giant hands gently shook me awake, tossed my hair, and with a wisp of wind, he placed a gentle hand under my chin. I rose from my bed and the cold winter was biting at my skin. I followed his giant footsteps down the stairs into our sitting room. It was a standard sitting room for the time, small but functional. But the walls of our sitting room were adorned with his beautiful works of art. Metal sculptures, wood carvings, strange paintings. And I was always fascinated by his art. It was dark, evocative. It was as if it was carved out of his inner pain. The fruits of a tortured mind trying to connect, to understand itself. I sat shivering on this lifeless leather chair in the sitting room, gazing into the fire. It was only embers at that stage, but it must have been a courageous fire the night before. But now its flames no longer danced as its light faded. I could hear Dad coughing in the kitchen, coughing away the remains of 1,000 cigarettes, coughing away the remains of tons of dust that must have passed through his now weary lungs. I gazed into the fire, an almost dream-like state, only the sound of the ticking clock keeping me company. Lying beside the hearth was this old mattress with some tossed covers on it. I don't remember questioning why it was there. It was just where Dad slept. The very meaning of it would become crystal clear years later. They no longer slept together. Too much war, too many rows, too much between them to keep them together or keep them apart. I rubbed my legs vigorously. It was so cold, trying to keep down these goosebumps that looked like golf balls on my skin. And then Dad came in carrying his hot cup of tea and a slice of toast. He looked at me and nodded at the mattress, and without a second thought, I dived right in. The warmth just enveloped me. It seemed to drive out the winter cold. I imagined it as some sort of magic cloth that was going to protect me from all the slings and arrows, and was somehow it might bring back the love and trust that had been ripped from us from all of us in those previous years. For now, I was happy just to be warm. Dad poured some of his tea into this old metal cup and ripped off a crust of his toast. I remember the melted butter clinging to the sides, waiting to be devoured. You see, us kids were never allowed to eat Dad's bread. He'd cut it thick from the loaf like doorsteps, whereas our thin bread was like wafers in comparison. That's what separated the kids from the adults, Dad's bread. But when you think about it, it was his own little luxury. But now that he was handing me a crust of his toast, I imagined in my innocence that I was being initiated into the ranks of men. Needless to say, the butter on that particular piece of toast didn't last very long. So we men sat in silence in the cold winter morning, the glow of the fire on our faces. Dad in his work boots and his grey satchel packed neatly with all his tools ready for work. Me in my skinny arms and my white vest with a ring of butter around my mouth. And on the table was this package wrapped in brown greaseproof paper. It was a homemade lunch for a giant, and he was a giant to me. And so I sat in the bed of a giant, sipping my tea. And I remember trying to get my hands around the cup, somehow make me feel more manly. And after a few minutes, he stood up. He was so tall, I had to arch my neck back just to see his face. He turned to me, and smiled, and ruffled my hair, and then he left. When I heard the front door close, I ran up onto the sofa just below our window. I opened the curtains, and I watched him, this giant, my dad, beat his way through the wind and rain. The weight of the world on his shoulders. All that guilt and shame pressing down him. So much weight. Weight that would have crushed stronger men. But not my dad. I loved him. Too young yet to resent him. To me, he was a king. And still is. I watched him through the window until he was no more than a black dot. And then he disappeared. And I jumped from the sofa back into the warmth of the mattress and the blankets. My heart was pounding and my mind racing, and I pulled the blankets up around my shoulders as tight as I possibly could. And as sleep began to take me, I began to think of my father, beating his way through the wind and rain, and his calloused hands would soon be rubbing themselves together, trying to keep warm, as he plastered yet another wall, the unlit cigarette butt hanging out of the corner of his mouth. Working his way through his demons. He was the most amazing man I have ever met. Tomorrow morning the same thing would happen again, only this time. But this time it would be someone else's turn to sleep in the giant's bed. But for now it was mine. All mine.